it's a strange question. Two massacres, an ocean and a decade apart. One in the heart of America, the other on a lonely farm in rural Germany. On the surface, they have nothing to do with each other, but the details, the weird, unsettling details, they start to line up. And when they do, you can't help but wonder, could one person have been responsible? Could a killer have crossed the Atlantic? Let's start in Iowa. Villisca, Iowa. The Moore family was part of the town's fabric. Josiah Moore was a successful businessman. He and his wife Sarah were respected. They had 4 children: Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. They were a church-going family, pillars of the community. On the evening of June 9th, 1912, the family went to the Presbyterian Church for the Children's Day program. Sarah Moore was one of the organizers. The kids all had parts to play. After the program, 2 friends of the Moore children, Lena and Ina Stillinger, were invited to stay the night. It was a common thing, a sleepover. The whole group, the 4 Moores and the 2 Stillinger girls, walked home together. They were seen on the street, happy, talking. They got home around 9:30 or 10 p.m. They had some milk and cookies. Then they went to bed. Next morning, a neighbor, Mary Peckham, noticed the house was unusually quiet. The Moores were early risers. By 7 a.m., there was usually activity, but the curtains were still drawn. The house was silent. She tried knocking on the door. No answer. She tried to open the door, but it was locked from the inside. She let the family's chickens out and waited. Still nothing. Worried, she called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. Ross arrived, and after more knocking and no answer, he used his own key to get inside. What he found was a horror scene. In the downstairs bedroom, he saw 2 bodies on the bed, covered by a sheet. He saw dark stains on the bedding. He immediately backed out of the house and told Mary Peckham to call the town marshal. What the authorities discovered was unimaginable. All 8 people in the house were dead. Josiah and Sarah Moore were in their downstairs bedroom. Their skulls had been crushed by an axe. Upstairs, the 4 Moore children and the 2 Stillinger girls were found in their beds. They had all met the same fate. The blows were so violent that the ceiling in the parents' bedroom had gouge marks from the upswing of the axe. But the scene was more than just brutal. It was bizarre. Every mirror and every piece of glass in the house had been covered with clothing or cloth. It was a deliberate act. The killer had taken the time to do this. A pan of bloody water was found in the kitchen, suggesting the killer had washed their hands. A plate of uneaten food was also there. And next to the pan was a 2-pound slab of raw bacon, wrapped in a dish towel. Why? Nobody knew. The murder weapon, Josiah Moore's own axe, was found in the downstairs guest room where the Stillinger girls were sleeping. It was bloody, but had been wiped down. The killer had locked the doors from the inside before leaving. And there was evidence that the killer, or killers, had been in the house for some time. They likely hid in the small attic crawl space waiting for the family to fall asleep. The town of Villisca was shattered. The investigation was a mess from the start. Hundreds of people tramped through the crime scene, contaminating everything. Souvenir hunters took pieces of the house. The investigation looked at several suspects over the years. There was a state senator, Frank Jones, who was Josiah Moore's business rival. Some believe he hired a man named William Blackie, Mansfield, to do the job. Mansfield was a suspected serial killer, but he had an alibi. Then there was Reverend George Kelly, an itinerant preacher who was in town that night. He was known for his strange behavior and had a history of mental illness. He even confessed to the murders years later, but then recanted. His trial ended in a hung jury. He was never convicted. The Villisca Axe Murders remain, to this day, officially unsolved. It was a crime of pure, senseless violence, marked by strange, ritualistic details that made no sense. Now, let's cross the Atlantic. 10 years later, Germany, 1922. The country was still reeling from World War I. Times were hard. Deep in the Bavarian countryside, about an hour's drive from Munich, was a small, isolated farmstead. It was called Hinterkaifeck. It wasn't even a real village, just the name of the farm. The family living there was the Grubers. They were not well liked. The patriarch, Andreas Gruber, was 63. He was known to be a difficult, abusive man. His wife, Kazelia, was 72. They lived with their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, who was 35, and her 2 children, 7-year-old Kazelia and 2-year-old Joseph. The family was reclusive and a subject of dark local gossip. It was widely rumored that Andreas was having an incestuous relationship with his daughter Victoria, and that little Joseph was his son. Just a few hours before she was murdered, a new maid named Maria Baumgartner arrived at the farm. The previous maid had quit 6 months earlier. She claimed the farm was haunted. She said she heard footsteps and voices in the attic and felt a constant sense of being watched. In the days leading up to the murders, strange things happened. Andreas Gruber told neighbors about finding a set of footprints in the snow. They led from the forest to the farmhouse, but there were no footprints leading away. He heard footsteps in the attic. He found an unfamiliar newspaper on the property. A set of house keys went missing. He told people he felt something was wrong, but he didn't call the police. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, it seems the killer made their move. The exact sequence of events is based on reconstruction, but the theory is this: one by one, members of the family were lured out to the barn. Andreas, his wife Kazelia, his daughter Victoria, and the older granddaughter Kazelia. They were all struck down with a mattock, a type of pickaxe that belonged to the farm. Their bodies were stacked in the barn and covered with hay. The killer then went back into the house. There they killed the 2-year-old Joseph as he slept in his cot in his mother's bedroom. Then they went to the maid's quarters and killed the new maid, Maria, in her bed. 6 people wiped out. But this is where the story gets even stranger. The killer didn't leave. For the next several days, the killer lived at the farm. The neighbors noticed smoke coming from the chimney. The family dog was still being fed, the cattle were tended to and milked. Someone was eating the food in the kitchen. The mailman saw that the mail he delivered was being read. The farm looked like it was still running. 4 days later, on April 4th, people finally realized something was seriously wrong. A search party went to the farm. They found the gruesome scene in the barn and the bodies in the house. The entire community was in shock. The investigation was, like in Villisca, a complete failure. The crime scene was compromised. The initial autopsies were botched. Over 100 suspects were questioned over the years, but no one was ever charged. A popular local suspect was a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He had a complicated relationship with Victoria and may have been the father of Josef. He was part of the search party and acted strangely at the scene, but the evidence against him was thin. Another theory was that Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, who was supposedly killed in the war, had actually survived and returned to exact some kind of revenge. His body was never found, but friends from his regiment swore he was dead. Just like Villisca, the Hinterkaifeck murders became a dark piece of local folklore. An unsolved mystery fueled by strange details and a deep sense of unease. A brutal crime with no clear motive. So, 2 horrific crimes, a decade and an ocean between them. Why would anyone think they are connected? It starts when you lay the details side by side. First, the weapon. In both cases, the murder weapon was a tool owned by the victims and found at the scene. In Villisca, it was an axe. At Hinterkaifeck, it was a mattock. It wasn't a gun or a knife brought by the killer. It was a tool of the household, of the farm, an intimate, brutal choice. Second, the motive. In both cases, robbery was not the motive. The Moore family in Villisca was relatively well off, but money and valuables were left untouched. The Gruber family had cash and coins in the house, but the killer didn't take them. This suggests the motive was not financial. It was personal, or psychological, or something else entirely. Third, the brutality. Both crimes were acts of extreme violence. The victims were bludgeoned, mostly in the head. It was overkill. This wasn't a quick, clean murder. It was ferocious, passionate, and hateful. And in both cases, the victims were attacked while they were vulnerable, most of them while sleeping or unsuspecting. Fourth, the strange post-mortem behavior. This is where it gets really weird. In Villisca, the killer covered all the mirrors. This is a very specific ritualistic act. It suggests a killer who was not just there to kill and run. They had a compulsion, a need to do something more. At Hinterkaifeck, the killer didn't just stay for a few minutes, they stayed for days. They lived in the victim's home, ate their food, did their chores. This is an incredible level of comfort and audacity at a crime scene. While the specific acts are different, both demonstrate a killer who lingers, who performs strange acts after the killing is done. They are not afraid of being discovered. Fifth, the attic. This is a very specific and creepy parallel. In Villisca, the evidence strongly suggests the killer hid in the attic, waiting for the family to go to sleep. At Hinterkaifeck, the previous maid complained of noises from the attic. Andreas Gruber himself heard footsteps in the attic in the days before the murders. It's a chilling thought, a killer living secretly within the walls of the house, watching and waiting. Sixth, the lack of forced entry. In Villisca, the doors were locked from the inside, suggesting the killer either had a key, was let in, or snuck in an unlocked door and then locked it behind them to secure the scene. At Hinterkaifeck, a set of keys had recently gone missing. The killer seemed to have easy access to the home. Seventh, the total annihilation of the family. In both cases, the killer didn't just target one person. They killed everyone in the house. Men, women, and children. Even the 2 visiting Stillinger girls in Villisca who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. This points to a killer whose rage is not specific to one individual but to the entire family unit. Or perhaps a killer who simply can't leave any witnesses. When you list them like that, the similarities are hard to ignore. They feel like more than just coincidence. They feel like a signature, a pattern. And this is where the theory of a transatlantic killer is born. The theory suggests that there was a single person, a serial killer, who was active in the early 20th century. This person was likely an itinerant worker, a drifter, someone who could move from town to town without raising suspicion. The string of axe murders in the United States around the same time as Villisca supports this idea. There were similar unsolved axe murders in 1911, and 1912 in Colorado, Kansas, and Illinois. These crimes shared some of the same features of family bludgeoned in their beds, an axe as the weapon, no clear motive, and strange details at the scene. One suspect in some of these American murders was a man named Paul Mueller. Or at least that was one of the names he used. He was a German immigrant, he was a suspect in a similar family murder in Massachusetts in 1897. He was a loner, a drifter. He fit the profile. Could a man like Paul Mueller have been responsible for Villisca and the other American axe murders? It's possible. Now, for the transatlantic leap, the American axe murders seemed to stop after 1912. Then World War I happened. It's conceivable that a German immigrant, like the hypothetical Paul Mueller, would have returned to Germany either before or after the war. The timing fits. A series of murders in the US culminating in 1912, then a 10-year gap which includes the war. Then, in 1922, a strikingly similar murder appears in rural Bavaria. Could the Villisca Killer and the Hinterkaifeck Killer be the same person? A man who learned his gruesome trade in America and then took it back to his homeland. It's a tantalizing theory. It connects two of the most baffling, unsolved crimes in history into a single, terrifying narrative. It gives us a face, however shadowy, for the evil that visited those two homes. It creates a story, and our minds crave stories to make sense of chaos. But, and this is a very big but, is it true? Or is it just a good story? When you look closer, the case for a connection starts to fall apart. First, let's look at the differences between the two crimes. They are just as significant as the similarities, if not more so. The method of killing, while both brutal, was different in a key way. In Villisca, all the victims were killed in their beds. It was a surprise attack on a sleeping household. At Hinterkaifeck, the evidence suggests that 4 of the victims were lured one by one into the barn. This implies a level of deception and interaction with the victims that is absent from the Villisca case. The killer didn't just sneak in. They may have been known to the family, or they tricked them. That's a very different psychological profile. The post-crime behavior is also profoundly different. Covering mirrors is a strange, symbolic act. It might suggest shame, or a superstition, or a desire not to see one's own reflection after the deed. Staying on a farm for several days, milking the cows, and feeding the dog is something else entirely. It suggests a complete lack of remorse and an almost proprietary attitude towards the victim's home and life. It's an act of inhabiting the space of the dead. One feels like a frantic, superstitious ritual. The other feels like a cold, calculated act of possession. The victims themselves were very different. The Moores were a beloved, respected family in a tight-knit community. The Grubers were isolated outcasts, surrounded by rumors of incest and abuse. The social context of the crimes is completely different. The murder of the Moores felt like an attack from an outside evil invading a peaceful town. The murder of the Grubers could very well have been the result of the dark secrets and grudges festering within their own small world. A local enemy had a much stronger motive at Hinterkaifeck than at Villisca. Even the similarities can be explained away. Using a farm tool as a weapon on a farm is not a signature. It's a matter of convenience. It's what was available. Brutal overkill with a blunt object is, sadly, not unique to one killer. It often indicates a personal rage, but that rage could come from anyone. The lack of a robbery motive is common in murders that are about power, control, or revenge, rather than financial gain. The attic connection is eerie, but it's also circumstantial. We think the Villisca killer hid in the attic. We know the Grubers heard noises in their attic. It's a parallel, but it's not hard proof. Many old houses have strange noises. The biggest hurdle for the transatlantic theory is simply the lack of any real evidence. There is no travel document, no letter, no diary, no confession that links a suspect to both continents. There is no physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprint, nothing. The entire theory is built on circumstantial parallels between the cases. And while those parallels are interesting, they are not proof. Coincidence is a powerful force. It's possible for 2 separate, disturbed individuals living thousands of miles apart to commit similar crimes. The human mind is complex and dark. The same violent impulses can arise in different people in different places. The theory of a single transatlantic killer is compelling because it simplifies the problem. It gives us one monster to hunt instead of 2. but the more likely truth is often less cinematic. The truth is probably that two different people committed these crimes. In Villisca, it may have been a transient, someone passing through town, who saw the Moors as a target of opportunity. Or it could have been someone with a hidden grudge, like Reverend Kelly, or a hitman hired by Frank Jones. The town had its own share of suspects. In Hinterkaifeck, the killer was very likely someone local. Someone who knew the family, knew the layout of the farm, and knew their routines. Someone who could lure them into the barn. The neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, remains a plausible suspect for many. The crime feels deeply personal and rooted in the history of that specific place and that specific troubled family. The idea of a single killer is a fascinating piece of true crime speculation, and it connects the dots and creates a chilling narrative. It has fueled countless books, documentaries, and late-night internet discussions. But it's probably just that, a story. A ghost story we tell to try and make sense of two senseless, brutal acts of violence. Ultimately, we are left with two impenetrable mysteries. The horror of Villisca is the horror of randomness, of a happy family being extinguished for no reason. The horror of Hinterkaifeck is the horror of isolation and dark secrets, of a family whose own dysfunctional world may have led to their doom. Are the Hinterkaifeck and Villisca murders connected? The honest answer is almost certainly no. The evidence just isn't there. The differences in the crimes are too stark. The logistical leap of connecting a killer across the Atlantic in that era with no proof is too great. The similarities are most likely tragic coincidences, echoes of the same darkness that can surface anywhere at any time. Thinking they are connected is more comforting in a way. It contains the evil. It makes it a singular phenomenon, a one-in-a-billion monster who roamed the earth for a time. The alternative is perhaps more frightening, that the kind of person who could pick up an axe and slaughter a sleeping family is not a rare transatlantic phantom. That they could be a neighbor, a rival, a stranger passing through town. That the potential for such violence is not a single, containable story, but a permanent and unpredictable part of the human condition, present in a small Iowa town in 1912 and on a remote German farm in 1922, and everywhere in between. The mystery isn't that one man did both. The mystery is that these things happen at all, and that sometimes we never find out why.